My name is Miles Miller. I had been hiking for several hours carrying a 50-pound pack. The weather closed in fast and visibility was down to less than 6 feet. There were high constant winds and driving rain. I was soaked through. I couldn't find the route out using my great map reading and compass skills. I used to regularly enter military navigation hiking competitions and always place in the top 3. Exhaustion kicked in. My map didn't match with the ground. There were high sheer drops all around. I was in great danger of walking off a cliff edge. I needed to seek shelter from the wind as much as possible. I risked sliding down one side of the saddle as much as I dared to try to reduce the effects of wind and rain. I sat on my pack to try to put some insulation between the cold, wet ground and myself. I closed my waterproofs up as much as they would go, including the hood to cover my face. I breathed in and out of my scarf to try to use breath on my face to reduce the heat loss speed here. I used my emergency whistle, but the wind kept blowing the sound back, and it was too high up for anyone to hear. I used flashlight, but the mist was too thick for the light to go anywhere. All I could do was await the mountain rescue team to come out and find me once I'd exceeded my contact time left with a family member. I had, along with a contact time, left the route I was taking. All I could do was to sit, huddled up, and watch the time on my watch reach the contact time. It was 2 or more hours away. I started to shiver very rapidly shortly after I'd stopped. I started to lose feelings in my toes, and then this gradually worked its way through the rest of my feet and up my legs. My fingers went completely numb, although I had my hands tucked in my armpits to try to keep them warm as long as possible. This sensation traveled through my hands and up my arms. I could no longer feel my nose and ears. I needed to urgently urinate. Finally, I did so into my clothes where I was sitting, hoping the heat from this would keep me alive a little longer. I was already soaked, and so more wetness at this stage could make no difference. The heat gave my butt, thighs, and lower waist some temporary respite from the cold. My shivering soon started to slow down and become less intense, not because I was warming, but because I had been shivering so long that I was running out of energy to shiver any longer. I watched the light change in the mist as the sun rose and started to set as it became darker. I was aware now that much time had passed beyond my contact time. The mist and weather was really extreme, and it would be crazy for a rescue team to come out in it. They'd need to both be on top of me to find me in the mist. The driving rain, wind, and mist combined with slippery terrain and sheer sudden drops made it a no-go. The best I could hope for was the possibility of a helicopter coming in a sudden break in the mist. Time passed, and I got the occasional glimpse of settlements way down below off in the distance, before they were once more obscured by the mist. I then started to pass in and out of consciousness, with the out of consciousness being a period of still being numb, but full of very real hallucinations. I then started to consider a new approach, pushing my rucksack ahead of me and relying on it suddenly no longer being there as a warning of a sheer drop there. The ground was steep and extremely slippery. There was no relying on this, as the pack might slip away from me because of the gradient and slipperiness of the surface. Also, the other extreme was that the moment the pack disappeared, it might well be too late to stop myself sliding over an edge. To end the horror of the cold, I strongly considered moving on, and if I died from the fall, it would be much faster than the death I was fast approaching from hypothermia. I didn't have enough energy to get myself up off the ground. I'd have to rely on the gradient and slipperiness of the surface to try and slide myself down. I decided to stay put and die where I was, as I wouldn't want to distress someone through finding my broken body at a cliff face. I was just about to qualify as a nurse after studying and years of unemployment. My hiking skills and strength had become my very weakness, I thought at the time. The test of my independence through my own skills and experience backfiring on me. None of my mountain survival skills, my navigation skills and experience, or my newly gained nursing skills and experience could release me of this predicament. I had money in my account I would not be around to spend. I had left no will. I started to wonder how long it would be before someone became aware that I was missing. How long it would be before my body was found. My hands couldn't move, so I couldn't write a note. The futility of life and everything to do with it started to dominate my thoughts and feelings. I was going to die very shortly now. I hoped there was life after life, as the person I had loved the most in my life had died half my lifetime before. I recalled she was a practicing Baptist and would be in heaven. Even if there were life after life, I wasn't going to see her again, as I'd lost my faith many years before. I continued to hallucinate and hated coming out to the reality of my situation. I eventually started to pray. I wanted to be reunited with the one I'd loved. My prayers became more intense and meaningful for the gift of my life I'd had, and for all those people I'd met during my life. My hallucinations continued, and I stayed in them longer and longer each time. Then suddenly, I had an experience that was nothing like I'd experienced before. I suddenly no longer had any form of physical sensations. The stress the cold had on my body was over. I felt such a positive emotional experience that it's impossible for me to describe. I was in an extremely bright environment with the only other being in front of me was a man in his early 30s, about 5'10", with his arms outstretched and dressed in a robe. He was smiling, radiating peace and so much love. Behind him stood a solid-looking object, taller than him in the shape of a cross. I didn't have a body myself. I just was. I was aware that I felt so much overwhelming peace, joy, love, and was no longer living. Suddenly I was back on the mountain saddle and wanted so very much to die and be back where I'd suddenly left. I kept praying to go back there, and expected what was happening was that I needed to be spiritually pure of heart in order to go back again. When that happened, I'd be immediately back there. As time went on, and my praying had intensified and started to recede, I considered there being another reason for my coming back. That God had wanted me back for his reason, which I didn't and still don't have a clue why that may be. I considered suicide by letting myself slide off the cliff edge, which I soon discovered I was less than several feet away from. Amazingly, daylight came much faster than I'd expected as night had been very short. The mist cleared, and the route down was only less than a dozen feet off and slightly below me to my left. I discovered I had suddenly strength within me, not only to get myself up, but to also stagger the few miles down and back to the nearest remote house for aid. The owners greeted me and were completely amazed that I'd managed to survive the night up there. Eventually, I shared with them my experience over the previous 24 hours, whilst waiting to be collected by the person who should have raised the alarm. They hadn't. They thought I'd just forgotten to contact them. To this day, I still have slight pins and needles feelings in every one of my fingertips. After more than 2 decades of working and studying as a nurse, a public health nurse and public health practitioner, I changed my direction. Now I continue to study privately the effects of spirituality in wild places on individuals, developing it recently into a business using an action research community development model in order to assist personal spiritual health. Watch this near-death experience next about a woman who met God and was shown the entire cosmos and what lies in the stars. It's truly remarkable.